I'm sharing some reflections with you today based on this article, which highlights the essence of love expressed in the Philocalic, in the wisdom of the Holy Fathers, in the Gospels, in revelation of the nature of God, of the uncreated one, as made known by the Christ. What this article reveals to us is an in-depth insight into what this is really all about. And it is so significant that I wanted to share it with you in this way. He begins with the examples from Christ's life, as witnessed in his encounter with the adulterous woman, with the Samaritan at the well, in which we see what the author calls, shocking non-judgment against all the social norms. He tells us he inspires us to love him through his shocking friendship towards us who are undeserving of it. In reference to the woman caught in adultery, he says it was this unwarranted love that ignited in her to change and to begin to love him. When Christ broke through the legalistic social rules and revealed to the Samaritan woman that he was aware of all her sins, it pierced her heart with awe and love. This demonstrates the transformational power of offering friendship and non-judgment to others. This is love as philia, the Greek word for that level, that kind of love, that friendship, that care for others, that familial sense of brotherly, sisterly love, leading to the next stage of love, and then to a third stage, namely eros and agape. He points out that in the Samaritan woman's life we see the threefold process of love. Christ offers philia, she responds to this outpouring with philia, and is then moved into eros for the only person to have truly known her and not judged her, so much so that she accepts torture and death for Christ, her beloved, and she in turn loves with agape and is deified by God's agape. He quotes from the famous Way of the Pilgrim, saying, "Not only did I experience all this within my soul, but everything around me appeared to be enchanting and inspired me with love for and gratitude to God. Trees, plants, and animals, I felt kinship with them all and discovered how each bore the seal of the name of Jesus Christ. At times I felt so lightweight as if I had no body and were not walking, but rather joyously floating through the air. Sometimes I knew such joy that I felt as if I had been crowned a king. It was at such moments of consolation that I wished that God would grant me to die as soon as possible so that I could pour myself out in gratitude at his feet in the spiritual world." Perhaps you can recognize something of that intensity of love, that fiery eros that lifts us up, expands our consciousness in loving all things. These are criteria for higher states, where some quality of energy comes through us that is of the most exhilarating nature, blissful, electric, transformative. This is what we find here in these writings, and they are signs pointing to the authentic relationship with the Holy One. The author quotes Saint Maximus the Confessor, one of the great holy fathers of the Egyptian desert. who refers to the famous saying from 1 John, "We love him because he first loved us." And he tells us that this divine eros stimulates the eros within the human being, rousing our eros back towards its source and moves us to become a lover of the one who first loved us. And in a marvelous new perspective, the author shows us how we can understand monasticism in an entirely different way, and therefore asceticism, and all of that which seems to be a negative or a denial, and is certainly often experienced that way and presented that way. But we are revealed here that the monastic is one who responds to God's advancing love towards them. In response, the monk fasts, practices asceticism, seeks stillness, Hezekiah, not out of disdain for the body or food, but out of spiritual hunger, thirst, and eros, to be still and hear the intimate voice of their beloved, who continuously advances towards them. Once again, Elder George, former abbot of the monastery in Mount Athos, says this power of eros within the psyche makes the human being thirst from the depths of their existence for unity with this archetype, for theosis. What is presented to us breaks through assumptions we may have had about what religion is all about. The author points out that God's relationship to us, transmitted through the stories of Old and New Testament, does not represent a legal contract or a transactional kind of love relationship, but rather, he says, God does not need our obedience to external rules, for as Christ said, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath, in Mark 2:27. He, the uncreated one, the source, as our bridegroom desires and seeks a bride that loves him. The monk is then one who seeks to love God with a perfect and all-consuming eros. And then our friend talks to us about the layperson, all of us who are not going to be in monasteries, and who are given in our life in the world a way to access the mystery of this divine spiritual eros in ways that perhaps we have not realized, that will open our eyes to what is possible. He tells us, when a married couple falls in love, seeks the beauty in one another, and desires one another with an all-consuming focus, they begin to understand and experience love, which in turn means they begin to understand and experience God, for God is love. This awakening to a love they have never felt before serves as a guidepost towards loving God, and as a means of experiencing God's immaterial love through the material. They now have their own intimate experience and understanding of love, of this love, out of what seems to be so human, so perhaps every day, although it is such a privilege, of course, to fall in love, to share a life together, to give oneself to another and receive another's love, is actually an initiation into the divine love, a way to access that very path in the midst of our everyday mortal existence, so that our desire to give to the other, even our very life for the protection of the other, becomes the very fire that leads us into God consciousness, into relationship, the relationship that Yeshua came to reveal to us. This means that in the kitchen, in the bedroom, in the marketplace, in life, we can access the highest spiritual conscious experience. The transformation, the path of theosis in our relationship with another person. Beyond the monastery, beyond the rituals and the church, here in the everyday, in the oh so human but oh so beautiful phenomenon of human love, of real human love, we can have the most mystical of experiences. The author says, by contemplating and experiencing the beauty of creation in one another, they are awakened to love, and their hearts and souls are moved and softened towards the beauty of the Creator. In this way, love in marriage can guide a human being to a knowing of the love of God. The author tells us that this is confirmed by Blessed Patriarch Callistos in the Philocalic when speaking of the threefold forms of love, philia, eros, agape. He states that the first two forms of love are an image of the highest and true form of love, noetic agape. Therefore, marriage serves as a mirror to move their love from philia to eros, and finally to see dimly through a mirror, pure noetic agape. In a parallel way, likewise, he says, the monastic who rises up in repentance is invited in philia to be a friend of God, becomes inflamed with eros for God, and is in pursuit of deifying noetic agape. Finally, the author tells us, self-denial is not rooted in self-hatred. Asceticism is responding to love with love, a seeking of the good, the beautiful, the divine. It is an emptying of self to be filled with the uncontainable one. And he quotes the great Saint Peter of Damascus from the Philocalic, having found God, he longs for him, and the more he longs, the more God longs for him. Then, purifying himself as much as he can, he struggles to make room in himself for the beloved for whom he longs. And the beloved for whom he longs, finding room for himself in this person, takes up his abode there. Dwelling there, he protects his home and fills it with light. The author goes on to speak of this idea of the fear of God, so poorly understood down through the ages, sometimes grasped as awe rather than literally fear and trembling. But then he takes it to another place by telling us, the lovers of God know from experience that their covenant with God mirrors a spousal relationship and not a legal contract. It is their immense love and their experience of God's immense love that is the source of their profound fear. Just as a husband and wife fear losing their beloved spouse and cannot imagine living without their love, so do the lovers of God fear losing the indescribable love of God. The fear of losing his love, or rather the fear of being unable to perceive his love, is what motivates the lover of God. The author tells us this is why the saints understand that we fast, pray, deny ourselves, and obey his laws, not for fear of hell, nor for the attainment of paradise, for then our life and efforts are merely a transaction with God. God needs nothing from us, not even our obedience to his laws. Asceticism and obeying his laws are entirely for us. Asceticism is an intimate invitation. And here the author gives us one of the finest descriptions that I have come across in modern times as to what this spiritual practice of asceticism is all about. Asceticism is an intimate invitation from our Beloved, calling us to turn within the very depths of our hearts, to search our hearts, to quiet ourselves, to wander the inner desert and find the kingdom within. Luke 17:21. He tells us the monk stays up all night in vigil, not out of any obligation or rule, but out of a yearning to speak to their beloved. And once again comes back to our experience in relationship with another person in the everyday world. Just as a man and woman, when they are first filled with the sparks of love, cannot stop talking to one another. They stay up all night speaking on the phone, never wanting to hang up, no matter how much their bodies tire. Their love compels them further. They would rather pass out from exhaustion while still on the phone than to cut their time short. This is the vision of love that compels the monk. Do you see the connection? Do you see the opening for all of us to find our way into the supreme, mystic love, transformative love, sought for by the monk and found by he or she who can love another with that kind of intensity and total commitment and devotion to the love and care of another. It turns out to be the open sesame of the cave with the treasures we have been seeking all along. Those who seek such mystic treasures. And once again, because this is so important, over against religious teaching that talks of obligation and rules and regulations, this reminder, so crucial and fundamental. Speaking of the monk, his participation in worship is not an obligation, but rather a necessity of his psyche, which thirsts for God. The author finally takes us to the very mystery of the sacrament of Holy Communion, at the heart of the Christian liturgical experience of the Church in its origins. And he tells us the true vision of Holy Communion is an experience, an encounter, a knowing of the most intense mystical intimacy between the human person and God. And this is why in the early church there was a separation at the time of Holy Communion between those who were baptized and those who were not, still referenced to this day with rituals saying that the catechumen must now depart this moment of the service. Why is that? Because of the intimacy of love that takes place in that moment of communion. What this is really all about. A veil is drawn between the nave and the narthex so that there can be the privacy for that kind of love to manifest. The author says the veil is drawn so that those not communing cannot gaze into the bridal chamber and intrude on the intimate mystery of the bridegroom communing with his bride. We enter to have intimacy with him, to love and be transformed by love, to be made whole, to be raised up to our rightful heritage. And just as the prophets had to boldly have an audience with God when we see him face to face at the Holy Chalice. All this mystery, all this ancient wisdom, all these spiritual metaphysical metanoia phenomena can be accessed, for he or she who truly loves another, and in that opening up of their heart, they have encountered God, the true relationship, the true purpose of religion, the relinking, the dwelling of the divine with the human.